Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a night tens of thousands of years ago. There were no cities, no electricity, no neon lights flooding the night. The world was lit only by the flicker of fire and the endless dome of stars above. The first humans who looked upward into the vast heavens saw patterns shimmering against the black canvas. Stars twinkled like silver dust scattered across the sky, and slowly the human mind began to connect the dots. Those clusters became stories, shapes of animals, gods, and spirit. It was here, in those prehistoric nights, that the earliest seed of astrology was planted. The invention of astrology did not happen in one single place, nor in one single moment. Rather, it was born from a universal human curiosity. What do these lights above mean? For early tribes, the stars were not simply distant suns as we now know them. They were living symbols, a celestial script written by the universe itself. Each season, the constellations would rise and fall, guiding hunters and gatherers, predicting when the rains would come and when it was time to plant seeds. This was the first role of astrology, timekeeping and survival. The heavens were the first calendar, and to ignore them meant risking famine, drought, or death. But slowly, a deeper idea began to take root. If the stars guide the crops, might they also guide the fate of human beings? Around 3000 BCE, in the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, the Babylonians began recording the movements of the planets and stars with extraordinary detail. They noticed something profound. Eclipses, planetary alignments, and celestial phenomena seemed to coincide with great events, wars, floods, the rise and fall of kings. The Babylonians believed the heavens were a cosmic mirror reflecting the affairs of Earth. To them, nothing was random. Every comet, every lunar eclipse, every wandering planet was a divine message. The universe spoke through the skies, and it was the duty of astrologer priests to decode this language for kings and rulers. This is how astrology first gained its power and fame. It was tied directly to politics and survival. Kings would not go to war nor crown a successor without consulting the stars. From Mesopotamia, the art of star-watching traveled down the Nile. The Egyptians embraced astrology, weaving it into their deeply spiritual worldview. To them, the stars were not just guides for crops, they were gods themselves. The Egyptians saw the stars as eternal beings, and their constellations were connected to myths of Osiris, Isis, Horus, and Ra. The Great Pyramids themselves were aligned with stellar constellations like Orion, representing Osiris, the god of resurrection. For Egyptians, astrology became a bridge between life and afterlife. They believed that the hour of one's birth, marked by the position of the stars, tied each soul to a divine destiny. When pharaohs died, their tombs were painted with celestial maps as though to guide their souls through the heavens. Here is a thought to keep your mind gently wandering as you listen. Why were some lights in the sky fixed while others seemed to wander? The ancients noticed that while most stars never moved relative to each other, there were a handful, 7 in total, that drifted slowly through the zodiac. These were the wandering stars, the planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, along with the Sun and Moon. To ancient people, these wandering lights were not just celestial bodies, they were powerful beings, gods in motion. Each one was thought to influence life on Earth. Mars, glowing red, was linked to war and blood. Venus, radiant and soft, was tied to love and beauty. Jupiter, the great giant, represented kingship and expansion. From this, the first horoscopes were born, a belief that the arrangement of these wandering gods at the moment of one's birth could shape character and destiny. Centuries later, astrology found new life in the hands of the Greeks. Philosophers such as Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle looked at the heavens with both awe and reason. The Greeks introduced the idea that the universe was not only divine but also mathematical, harmonies of numbers and geometry woven into the cosmos. This was the age when astrology became systematic and intellectual. The zodiac, divided into 12 signs, each with unique qualities, was formalized. Aries the ram, Taurus the bull, Gemini the twins. These symbols became not only constellations, but archetypes of human personality. By the time of Alexander the Great, astrology had spread across much of the known world, blending Babylonian records, Egyptian mysticism, and Greek philosophy into a single, powerful discipline. So tonight, as you listen, imagine yourself standing with those first stargazers thousands of years ago. Imagine the silence of the desert, the fire flickering at your side, and above you, the endless night sky whispering secrets through its stars. For them, astrology was not entertainment, not merely prediction. It was the heartbeat of the cosmos itself, a great symphony that tied every soul, every king, and every farmer to the rhythm of the heavens. And this, my dear listener, was only the beginning. When the Greeks shaped astrology into a structured science of the heavens, it was like lighting a flame in the dark. That flame did not stay in one land. It traveled, carried by scholars, conquerors, and merchants across the world. Wherever it went, it merged with local beliefs, creating unique forms of astrology that still echo through time. After Greece, Rome inherited not only Greek gods and philosophy, but also their celestial wisdom. The Romans were practical people, and to them, astrology was not simply mystical. It was a tool for governance, entertainment, and everyday decision-making. By the 1st century BCE, astrology was everywhere in Rome. Emperors employed court astrologers to determine the best days for coronations, battles, and political campaigns. Julius Caesar himself was rumored to have consulted the stars, while Emperor Augustus proudly displayed his horoscope, linking his destiny to the heavens. For the first time, astrology reached the common people. No longer was it just for kings or priests. It became fashionable for merchants, farmers, and even soldiers to know their birth charts. Markets bustled with astrologers offering predictions for love, health, and fortune. The public appetite for astrology was insatiable, but Rome also introduced something else: suspicion. Some emperors feared astrology's power. After all, if the stars could reveal the death of a ruler, then they could spark rebellion. This led to waves of bans and persecutions, though astrology always returned, resilient as the stars themselves. Far from Rome, in the vast land of India, astrology took on a new form, one that still thrives today. Known as Jyotish Shastra, or the science of light, Indian astrology wove together the observation of stars with the philosophy of karma and reincarnation. Here, the planets were not just symbols, they were grahas, cosmic forces that grasped and influenced the soul. Each person's birth chart, or kundali, was seen as a map of their karmic destiny. The position of the moon, sun, and planets revealed lessons the soul must learn in this lifetime, the challenges to face, and the blessings to embrace. Indian astrology became deeply spiritual. It was not only about predicting events, but about guiding the soul toward harmony with cosmic law, known as dharma. Marriage, business, travel, almost every important decision in traditional Indian society was made with the help of an astrologer. The Indian system also introduced nakshatras, or lunar mansions, 27 unique divisions of the sky based on the moon's path. These subtle details made Indian astrology one of the most intricate systems ever created. Even today, millions across India begin their day by checking auspicious timings called muhurtas, derived from this ancient system. Meanwhile, in China, astrology became a vast and sophisticated machine of the state. The Chinese saw the heavens as a great empire mirroring their own earthly kingdom. The emperor, called the Son of Heaven, was believed to rule in harmony with the stars. Chinese astrologers worked in grand observatories, charting the sky with precision instruments. Their task was not only to guide the emperor, but to ensure that the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule, remained intact. If eclipses or comets appeared, it was seen as a warning that the dynasty's balance was faltering. Chinese astrology took a different path from the Western zodiac. Instead of 12 constellations based on months, it focused on 12 animals in a repeating cycle of years: the rat, ox, tiger, and so on. These animals were linked with the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, creating a system both elegant and profound. While Western astrology focused on the moment of birth, Chinese astrology emphasized time cycles, destiny unfolding in patterns, much like the turning of seasons. Now pause and think, how could it be that civilizations separated by thousands of miles with no shared language all turned to the stars for answers? From Rome to India, from China to Babylon, every culture saw the heavens not as distant chaos, but as a meaningful design. Could it be coincidence? Or is there something deeper in the human mind that instinctively looks upward and senses a hidden order? This mystery has never been fully solved, and perhaps it never should. For part of astrology's charm is the way it invites us to feel connected to nature, to time, to the universe itself. By the 1st century of our era, astrology had truly become global. In one corner of the world, a Roman soldier might carry a small tablet inscribed with his zodiac sign for protection. In another, a Chinese farmer would consult the lunar calendar to know when to plant rice. In India, a family preparing for marriage would gather around an astrologer, waiting for the stars to bless the union. Astrology was no longer just about kings and empires, it was about human life itself. It became the language of hope and fear, of love and ambition, of the eternal desire to know, what does the future hold? So as you drift tonight, imagine the great web of civilizations, each beneath the same sky, yet weaving their own patterns of meaning. Picture the Roman astrologer scribbling charts by candlelight, the Indian sage tracing lunar mansions in the sand, and the Chinese astronomer gazing through his bronze instruments at the heavens, all of them separated by vast distances, yet united by the same question, the one you might also carry as you listen. What is written for me in the stars? And though their answers differed, the stars above them were the same stars that shine above you tonight. As centuries passed, astrology did not remain still. Like the stars themselves, it continued to move, to expand, to transform. When the knowledge of Greece and Rome merged with the wisdom of Babylon, Egypt, India, and China, something extraordinary began to unfold. The old stargazers who once marked eclipses with fear and awe had given way to philosophers, mathematicians, and scholars who sought to understand not only the poetry of the heavens, but also its hidden logic. It was during this time that astrology entered what many would later call its golden age, a time when it became both an art and a science, something that stretched the human imagination and whispered that there was order, perhaps even destiny, written into the vast sky above. The scholars of Alexandria, that great city of learning, took the fragmented traditions of astrology and bound them together into more complex systems. It was here that the idea of a complete natal chart, drawn not only from the position of the sun, but also from the moon and the planets, was refined. Birth was no longer a moment marked by a single symbol, but by a whole symphony of celestial movements frozen in time like the still frame of a cosmic dance. This chart became a mirror of the soul, a tool not only to predict fate, but to understand personality, strengths, and weaknesses. For the first time, astrology moved beyond kings and rulers to ask a deeper question. What does the universe say about who you are? Imagine a scholar in a candle-lit chamber unrolling papyrus covered with delicate symbols, each curve and line representing Mars, Venus, or Saturn. Around him are shelves heavy with scrolls that record generations of observations, and in the corner sits a small bronze armillary sphere, its rings representing the paths of the heavens. He dips his pen into ink, and slowly, carefully, he marks the chart of a newborn child. He believes, as many did in those days, that the stars are not only signs in the sky, but threads in a grand tapestry woven together with the threads of human life. This was astrology not as superstition, but as philosophy, a search for harmony between the macrocosm, the great universe, and the microcosm, the single soul. At the same time, astrology became deeply entangled with medicine. Physicians of the old world studied the alignment of the stars before prescribing remedies. They believed that each sign of the zodiac ruled a part of the human body. Aries the head, Taurus the throat, Gemini the arms and lungs, and so on. If a patient came ill under certain planetary influences, the doctor would first consult the heavens to decide when to bleed, when to administer herbs, and when to let nature take its course. Astrology was not separate from science. It was science, as real and serious as geometry or medicine. To question astrology in those days would be like questioning whether the sun would rise tomorrow. The Middle Ages carried this tradition forward. Monks and scholars preserved astrological texts alongside holy scriptures, and kings across Europe sought guidance from their astrologers before waging war or sealing alliances. The stars were everywhere, painted into cathedral ceilings, inscribed into manuscripts, woven into the very rhythm of time itself. The calendar was built upon astrological understanding, festivals aligned with solstices and equinoxes, prayers whispered under certain moons believed to carry more power. Astrology was not merely consulted, it was lived. The common farmer looked at the phases of the moon before planting his crops, while the scholar at the university pored over the same heavens for signs of greater philosophical truths. One can almost hear the quill scratching across parchment as learned men debated not only the meaning of the zodiac but the nature of destiny itself. If the stars wrote our fates, then where was free will? Was man a puppet dangling from the strings of planets, or was astrology merely a guide, a whisper of tendencies rather than commands? This question stirred quietly through medieval halls of learning, lingering like incense in a chapel, neither fully answered nor forgotten. For every prediction that seemed to come true, there was another that failed, and yet the charm of astrology remained unbroken. People clung to it not because it was perfect, but because it gave meaning to the chaos of life. Meanwhile, far from Europe, the golden age of Islamic scholarship brought astrology to new heights. Great observatories were built, instruments perfected, and mathematical tables drawn with astonishing precision. The scholars of Persia, Baghdad, and Cordoba did not simply believe in astrology, they measured it, catalogued it, refined it. They sought to understand the exact paths of the planets, not only for mystical purposes, but for navigation, trade, and the creation of calendars. It was in this time that the line between astronomy and astrology blurred almost completely. To gaze at the heavens was both a scientific act and a spiritual one. The stars were tools, yes, but also symbols, and every number carried with it a hidden meaning. Astrology traveled across cultures like a restless wanderer, adapting and changing as it went. In India, the grahas, those celestial forces, merged with mathematical astrology from the Greeks, producing intricate systems of calculation. In China, astrologers continued to observe the heavens as a mirror of the emperor's reign, carefully recording comets and eclipses, believing they reflected the moral state of the empire itself. Across Africa, indigenous star wisdom blended with imported astrology, producing unique traditions where stars were both ancestors and guides. Everywhere, under different skies, humanity looked upward and saw not cold fire, but living messages. And yet, even in this golden age, the questions deepened. Some began to ask, if the stars influence us, how do they do it? What invisible force connects Mars, a planet millions of miles away, to the passions of a human heart? What link binds Saturn's slow, heavy orbit to a man's melancholy? To some, the answer was sympathy, a hidden thread of connection running through all things. To others, it was simply the will of the divine written into creation itself. And to yet others, it was mystery, something that could be observed but never fully explained. In the quiet of night, these thinkers must have sat staring at the sky and wondered whether the heavens were guiding them or whether they were only projecting their own stories upward. As astrology grew, so did its critics. Philosophers warned against relying too heavily on it, arguing that wisdom should come from within, not from charts and symbols. Religious leaders sometimes condemned astrology, fearing that it challenged divine authority, but no criticism, no persecution could extinguish its allure, for as long as people were born into uncertainty, as long as they loved, feared, hoped and dreamed, they would seek signs in the stars. Astrology promised not only predictions but comfort, a sense that life was not random, that joys and sorrows were part of a pattern as old as the universe itself. So picture the scene. A medieval town, the air cool with the scent of wood smoke. In the marketplace, an astrologer sits with a worn table and a bundle of charts. A young couple approaches, nervous about their marriage, and the astrologer traces the positions of Venus and the moon, telling them that their union will be blessed, but tested. A merchant comes next, asking if the stars favor his journey across the sea, and the astrologer studies Jupiter's place in the heavens before answering. That night, a scholar, in his stone chamber, stays awake long into the night, comparing planetary tables, convinced that the motion of the heavens can reveal the hidden structure of the cosmos itself. And above them all, the stars burn silently, indifferent yet endlessly inspiring, as they always have. This was the golden age of astrology, when it seemed that the heavens spoke in a language clear enough to be studied, mysterious enough to never be fully mastered, and beautiful enough to captivate every soul who lifted their eyes to the night sky. As time moved forward, the golden age of astrology began to bend beneath the weight of change. The world was shifting, and so too was the way humanity looked at the heavens. The Middle Ages slowly gave way to the Renaissance, a time when the thirst for knowledge burned brighter than ever before. Artists, poets, scientists, and philosophers all turned their gaze to the same sky, but now they sought not only meaning, but precision, clarity, and truth. It was during this flowering of curiosity that astrology faced both its greatest challenge and its greatest transformation. The Renaissance was a time when man dared to say that the universe could be measured, that its secrets could be unlocked not just by prayer or tradition, but by experiment, by mathematics, by reason itself. Yet even as telescopes were raised and the orbits of planets were calculated, astrology still remained woven into the very fabric of life. Great thinkers who are today remembered as scientists, Kepler, Galileo, even Copernicus, lived in a world where astrology and astronomy were two sides of the same coin. They charted the heavens to understand their movements, but they also read those movements as signs. Kepler, who gave us the laws of planetary motion, also cast horoscopes for noble patrons. Galileo, who first lifted his telescope to the sky, was still bound to a culture that believed the stars had messages for mankind. The separation we now take for granted did not yet exist. Imagine the Renaissance astrologer surrounded by books of Euclid and Aristotle, Ptolemy and Aquinas, yet still turning his eyes upward with reverence. By candlelight he unrolled charts for dukes and queens, predicting not only eclipses but also fortunes. He was both mathematician and mystic, balancing on a bridge between two worlds. And in this balance, astrology thrived, not yet threatened, by the march of science, but nourished by it. For in that time, the universe was still seen as a grand harmony, a cosmic order in which the movement of the smallest creature and the mightiest planet were connected. To study the stars was to study the self, to look outward and inward at the same time, but shadows were forming. With the invention of the printing press, knowledge spread faster than ever before. Charts, almanacs, and horoscopes began to reach the common man in a way never seen before. Astrology, once guarded by priests and scholars, became something for the masses. This both strengthened and weakened it. On one hand, every farmer could now read an almanac and decide when to plant his seeds. On the other, the very abundance of popular horoscopes cheapened the art, and scholars began to sneer at what they saw as superstition. The delicate bridge between science and astrology began to crack. Then came the Enlightenment, that great awakening of reason. Suddenly the world no longer wanted mysteries, it wanted facts. Telescopes grew more powerful, mathematics more refined, and philosophy more skeptical. The universe was no longer described as a divine harmony, but as a vast machine, cold, predictable, and governed by laws that could be calculated. Newton's gravity explained the fall of an apple and the orbit of the moon with the same equation. What need was there then for symbols, for myths, for planets whispering secrets into the ears of men? Astrology was pushed into the shadows. To the rational mind of the Enlightenment, it was superstition, no better than fortune-telling with cards or crystal balls. Universities dropped it from their curricula, scientists turned their backs, and priests condemned it as a rival to divine providence. For the first time in its long history, astrology seemed destined to die. And yet it did not. Because even in the age of reason, humans were not only creatures of logic, they were still creatures of longing, of fear, of hope, of curiosity. The stars still shone, silent but powerful, and no argument could erase the sense that they carried meaning. Astrology, though scorned by scholars, lived on in the homes of ordinary people. Farmers still looked to the moon before planting, lovers still read their horoscopes, mothers still whispered to their children the tales of their signs. It may have lost its throne in the palace of science, but it remained a quiet king in the hearts of the people. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as industrial machines roared and cities grew, the stars seemed farther than ever from daily life. Smoke dimmed the skies, and the old rhythm of nature was drowned by the ticking of clocks and the hiss of steam engines. But in this new world of iron and industry, astrology found yet another way to survive. It retreated into mysticism, joining forces with esoteric traditions, secret societies, and occult philosophies. The stars became not only guides to destiny, but symbols of spiritual awakening, maps of the soul's journey through unseen worlds. Astrologers were no longer only advisors to kings, they became teachers for those who sought hidden truths in a society that seemed increasingly mechanical and hollow. Picture a Victorian parlour, heavy with velvet curtains and the scent of burning candles. A small group gathers around a table where an astrologer, dressed in dark robes, explains the influence of Saturn on the trials of life, or Venus on the affairs of love. To the skeptics it was nonsense, but to those gathered it was comfort, beauty, and meaning in an age where science explained much but left the heart unsatisfied. Astrology offered not certainty, but story, a story that placed human life within a cosmic drama. And that story was too enchanting to fade. Even as telescopes revealed that stars were not divine fires but suns like our own, scattered across unimaginable distances, astrology continued to whisper that they mattered to us, that they were not random, that somehow their arrangement still held significance. Some argued that the justification was symbolic, others that there were hidden forces yet undiscovered by science. And still, in quiet rooms and crowded marketplaces, in whispered predictions and printed horoscopes, the practice endured. By the dawn of the 20th century, astrology was ready for yet another rebirth, one that would surprise even its own believers. In newspapers across the world, the daily horoscope became a ritual for millions. For the first time in history, the stars spoke not only to kings and scholars, not only to farmers and mystics, but to everyone. A factory worker in London, a housewife in New York, a student in Bombay, they could all open the morning paper and find their fate written under the sign of Aries, Taurus, or Pisces. Astrology had been democratized, turned into a universal language of destiny. And so, despite the rise of science, despite centuries of skepticism, astrology survived. It survived because it filled a space science did not. It gave poetry to the stars, turned cold orbits into living symbols, and reminded humanity that it was not only part of a machine, but part of a mystery. To this day, when people read their horoscope, when they ask what their sign says about love or career, they are continuing a tradition older than any nation, older than any book, older even than the pyramids themselves. They are carrying forward the ancient human habit of looking upward and asking, what does it all mean? And the stars, silent and timeless, continue to shine, refusing to answer, yet always inviting us to wonder. The 20th century dawned with the same stars above, yet the world below was shifting faster than ever before. Trains thundered across continents, factories roared with mechanical life, and towers of steel rose into the sky. Humanity was entering an age of speed, technology, and science, and in such an age, one might have thought that astrology would finally fade into the dust of forgotten traditions. But instead it found a new rhythm, a new way to speak, and in doing so, it lived on more strongly than anyone could have imagined. Astrology, which once guided emperors and kings, now found its way into the hands of ordinary men and women across the world. With newspapers reaching every home, the daily horoscope became a familiar companion. Simple, light-hearted predictions written for each of the 12 Zodiac signs spread like wildfire, and millions of people began their mornings by checking what fate had in store. Some laughed, some believed, but nearly everyone read. The horoscopes were brief, sometimes playful, but beneath them lay the ancient idea that the stars had something to say about the course of one's day. For the first time in history, astrology had become truly universal, a shared language stretching across cities, countries, and cultures. Yet beneath this playful surface, a deeper transformation was taking place. In a world where psychology was emerging as a new science of the mind, astrology began to merge with ideas about personality, behavior, and the unconscious. Carl Jung, one of the great thinkers of modern psychology, spoke of astrology not as a literal force of the planets, but as a symbolic system reflecting archetypes buried deep within the human psyche. To him, the zodiac was not a map of the stars controlling us, but a mirror of the patterns within our own inner world. This gave astrology a new kind of dignity, rescuing it from the accusation of superstition and placing it within the realm of psychology and symbolism. Imagine a quiet study in the 1930s with shelves lined with books on both ancient astrology and modern psychology. A young student opens a chart of their birth and compares it with Jung's writings, discovering that the position of Saturn speaks to discipline and trials, while the moon reveals the landscape of emotion and Venus reflects love and desire. For the student, this was not magic, nor was it blind belief. It was a way of understanding the self, a language that gave shape to feelings that could not be measured by science alone. In this form, astrology became not only about fate, but about self-discovery. It became a tool for those seeking meaning in a world growing more mechanical and impersonal by the day. The decades that followed only deepened this transformation. As the 1960s arrived, a great wave of counterculture swept across the Western world. People sought new spiritualities, new freedoms, new ways of seeing life beyond the rigid structures of industry and science. In this fertile soil, astrology blossomed once more. It became part of the New Age movement, a symbol of personal awakening and cosmic connection. Birth charts were drawn at festivals and communes. The language of Mercury retrograde and lunar eclipses entered everyday speech. And suddenly, astrology was not just about predicting the future, it was about living in harmony with the universe. Picture a gathering in the 1970s, the air fragrant with incense, soft music playing, a group of friends sitting in a circle. At the center, someone reads a birth chart aloud, tracing the lines of the houses and planets, interpreting what they mean for love, for creativity, for the soul's journey. Laughter and curiosity mix with awe. For these seekers, astrology is not superstition, it is poetry, a bridge between the outer world of stars and the inner world of feelings. Each sign becomes a way to understand themselves and each other. Fiery Aries rushing forward, dreamy Pisces lost in imagination, stubborn Taurus seeking comfort, curious Gemini chasing ideas. Astrology became not a prophecy but a language of personality, one that people could share and use to connect with one another. At the same time, astrologers sought to justify their art in scientific terms. Some argued that the gravitational or electromagnetic fields of the planets might subtly influence human biology. Others spoke of synchronicity, the mysterious principle that events in the universe could reflect each other without direct cause and effect. Though science did not embrace these ideas, they offered a way for astrology to stand beside scientific thought rather than beneath its shadow. For many, astrology did not need proof. It only needed meaning, and meaning it provided in abundance. The 20th century also gave birth to astrology books, magazines, and eventually television shows, spreading the zodiac further than ever. What was once whispered by priests in temples was now discussed in living rooms, coffee shops, and classrooms. Children grew up knowing their sun sign before they even learned multiplication tables. "What's your sign?" became not only a question, but a doorway into conversation, sometimes playful, sometimes deeply personal. Astrology had become part of culture itself, stitched into the rhythm of daily life. And as the century turned, astrology found yet another new home, the digital world. Computers could now generate birth charts with astonishing accuracy, something that once took astrologers hours or even days. Websites flourished, offering instant horoscopes, compatibility readings, and interpretations of planetary transits. Astrology entered the era of speed and information, becoming more accessible than ever before. A person in New York could check the movement of Mars on their phone, while another in Tokyo could compare birth charts with a stranger halfway across the world. The stars, once distant and mysterious, were now carried in the pockets of millions. It is tempting to wonder how the ancient Babylonians would have reacted if they could have seen this, if those priests who once carved star movements into clay tablets could have imagined that thousands of years later their same patterns would be read by people on glowing screens, in languages they had never heard of, across continents they did not know existed. Perhaps they would not have been surprised, for to them the stars were eternal, and their messages would always find a way to reach humanity. And so, despite the march of science, despite the skepticism of modern minds, astrology did not disappear. It changed, it adapted, it spoke new languages, but at its heart it remained the same. A reminder that life is not random, that there is rhythm in the chaos, and that the heavens above and the hearts within may be more deeply connected than we can ever truly understand. As the century ended and a new one began, the stars still shone over cities bright with electric light, over deserts and forests, over oceans and mountains. Humanity continued to ask the same question it had asked since the beginning. What do the heavens say about me? And astrology, ancient and ageless, continued to whisper answers, sometimes vague, sometimes profound, but always enough to keep the wonder alive. The 21st century arrived beneath the same stars, but humanity now lived in a world unimaginable to the ancient sky watchers. Skyscrapers stretched into the heavens, satellites circled the earth, and digital screens glowed brighter than campfires. The night sky, once the great companion of every human life, was now often drowned by city lights, its constellations hidden from view. Yet even as the stars themselves grew harder to see, astrology became more present than ever before. For in this new age it found a home not in the sky above, but in the invisible web of the digital world. The rise of the internet transformed astrology in ways no one could have predicted. What once required long hours of calculation by hand could now be done instantly by a computer. The complex mathematics of birth charts, once drawn slowly and carefully on parchment, became available with the click of a button. Online platforms blossomed, offering charts, interpretations, compatibility readings, and even personalized daily guidance. Suddenly, astrology was no longer the guarded knowledge of the trained astrologer. It was accessible to anyone, anywhere, anytime. A young student in Brazil could generate their chart in minutes. A curious reader in Japan could explore the meaning of their moon sign at midnight. The wisdom once preserved in temples and libraries now flowed freely through the digital streams of the world. This accessibility breathed new life into astrology. The old language of sun signs, so familiar from newspaper columns, was now joined by deeper explorations: rising signs, moon signs, planetary aspects, houses, transits. People discovered that they were not simply a Virgo or a Leo, but complex mixtures of many influences woven together into unique patterns. Social media filled with posts about Mercury retrograde, memes about Saturn returns, discussions about the meaning of eclipses. Astrology was reborn not as a rigid system of fate, but as a cultural language, playful yet profound, poetic yet practical. And perhaps what made this digital revival so powerful was that it came at a time when people felt more disconnected than ever. Modern life, though filled with technology, often left individuals isolated, adrift in a sea of screens and schedules. The old communal rhythms of life, the seasons, the harvests, the cycles of nature were increasingly forgotten in the hum of machines and the blur of city lights. But astrology offered a way to reconnect, to feel part of a larger pattern. When someone read that the moon was full, that Mercury was in retrograde, or that Saturn was moving into Aquarius, it reminded them that life was not only about deadlines and traffic, but about cycles and rhythms that stretched far beyond the human world. In this way, astrology became a comfort, a thread connecting the lonely individual to the cosmos. A young woman scrolling through her phone late at night might read about her moon sign and suddenly feel seen in a way no algorithm had ever managed. A man overwhelmed by work might discover that his Saturn return explained the trials he was facing, giving him the patience to endure. A teenager feeling lost might learn that their rising sign made them appear confident when they were, in truth, shy, offering a language to understand the contradictions of their own nature. Astrology became not just prediction, but therapy, a mirror for self-reflection in a world that often lacked mirrors of the soul. Yet, alongside this revival came new critics. Scientists and skeptics pointed out, as they had for centuries, that there was no empirical evidence that planets influenced human fate. They argued that astrology thrived only on vagueness, that people believed what they wished to believe, and that its predictions were too general to be tested. The more astrology spread across social media, the louder these voices became. And yet the criticism did little to stop its rise. For those who loved astrology did not always seek scientific proof. They sought meaning, language, comfort, and connection, and astrology offered those things in abundance. The debate between skeptics and believers grew sharper, but in the end, it mattered little. Astrology was no longer only about belief, it was about culture. To know one's sun sign was as common as knowing one's favorite color. To laugh about Mercury retrograde was as normal as joking about the weather. Even those who dismissed astrology often found themselves speaking its language, using its symbols, participating in its rhythms. Like myth, like poetry, like music, astrology did not require proof to endure. It required only resonance. It also became a tool of identity in new ways. In a world where individuality was celebrated yet often confusing, astrology offered a framework to understand oneself and others. People found community in their signs, forming groups of Scorpios or Pisces, bonding over shared traits, laughing at shared flaws. Astrology created a sense of belonging in a fragmented world. It gave people words to describe themselves: sensitive, fiery, balanced, intense, and in those words they found clarity and connection. At the same time, astrology expanded beyond the personal into the collective. Writers and astrologers began to speak of generational planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and how their slow movements shaped entire eras. They linked the rebellious spirit of the 1960s to Uranus in Virgo and Pluto in Virgo, the dreamy spirituality of the 1970s to Neptune's influence, the technological revolutions of the 1990s to Uranus in Aquarius. Suddenly, astrology was not only about the individual but about history itself, about the great cycles that shaped humanity's collective destiny. People listened and wondered, were the upheavals of the present also written in the stars? Did the alignments of planets explain why entire generations carried the same dreams, the same burdens, the same battles? And beyond even this, astrology seeped into art, music, and literature. Songs referenced zodiac signs, novels wove astrology into their plots, fashion lines were designed around the 12 constellations. The stars, once carved into temple walls, now glittered on clothing, jewelry, and digital wallpapers. Astrology became not only a belief system, but an aesthetic, a way of seeing and celebrating beauty. The zodiac wheel turned into a symbol that could be worn, shared, and cherished. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this modern revival was its intimacy. Unlike the public horoscopes of newspapers, the new astrology was deeply personal. With a birth date, time, and location, an entire chart could be drawn, giving a unique map for each person. It was not about all Libras are like this, but about the intricate interplay of planets in one specific life. Technology allowed people to explore this complexity in ways no culture before had imagined. Every smartphone could become an astrological compass, revealing hidden details of the self. For some, this felt like destiny. For others, it was simply a language of self-exploration. Still, the question remained as it always had. Why did astrology continue to endure? Why, in an age of satellites and genetics, did so many still look to the stars for guidance? The answer, perhaps, lies not in proof, but in need. Humanity has always hungered for story, for pattern, for meaning. Science explains how, but astrology whispers why. Science gives us knowledge, but astrology offers narrative. And when life feels random, when choices feel heavy, when the future feels uncertain, narrative is often what the heart seeks most. So in the digital age, as people scrolled through endless feeds and flooded their minds with constant information, astrology became a gentle counterbalance. It slowed the chaos into cycles, it gave shape to time, it reminded people that there was rhythm hidden beneath the noise. It told them that they were not alone, that their struggles had been faced before, that their joys were part of something greater. It gave them permission to see themselves as characters in a cosmic story, not lost in randomness, but carried by currents older than the earth itself. And late at night, as the glow of the screen faded and silence returned, many still found themselves gazing upward. Perhaps the city lights hid most of the stars, but the moon was there, glowing softly, eternal and patient. And in that quiet moment, with or without belief, they felt the same wonder that had stirred the first humans tens of thousands of years ago. They felt connected, small yet significant, fragile yet eternal. And astrology in its ever-changing forms continued to weave the same ancient spell, the promise that life, no matter how uncertain, is written into a story far larger than ourselves. For thousands of years, astrology lived comfortably, without the need for scientific justification. It was a language, a mirror, a rhythm of time, and those who practiced it never felt compelled to prove its truth in a laboratory. The stars were sacred, the heavens divine, and the link between the cosmos and human life was self-evident to the ancient mind. But with the rise of modern science, with telescopes peering into the farthest galaxies and microscopes revealing the smallest cells, a new demand arose. Could astrology be proven? Was there a mechanism, a force, a hidden thread that truly tied the movement of planets to the unfolding of human fate? Some argued immediately that it could not be. They said astrology was a relic of an older age, a charming myth, a psychological trick of the mind. Yet others, drawn by both curiosity and faith, searched for explanations. If the moon could move the oceans, did it not also affect the water within us? If the sun's cycles influenced crops and weather, could it not also influence human moods? If gravity bound the cosmos together, was it so strange to think that distant planets might also exert subtle pulls upon the human soul? In the 17th century, when Isaac Newton formulated the laws of motion and gravity, a story is told that an astrologer once challenged him. "You do not believe in astrology, but how do you explain the forces of the moon upon the tides?" Newton is said to have replied, "Sir, I have studied the subject, and you have not." Whether the tale is true or not, it reflects a tension that has lasted centuries, the suspicion of scientists, the faith of astrologers, and the mysterious middle ground between them. As psychology emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries, a new kind of justification began to take shape. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, did not claim that planets physically influenced us through forces. Instead, he proposed the idea of synchronicity, the notion that meaningful coincidences occur, not because of physical causation, but because of deeper patterns woven into reality. To Jung, astrology was not superstition, but a symbolic language of the psyche. The positions of planets at one's birth did not cause personality traits, but mirrored them. The outer world and the inner world, he believed, were not separate, but deeply entangled. Jung wrote, "We are born at a given moment, in a given place, and like vintage years of wine, we have the qualities of the season and of the year in which we are born." For him, astrology was a map of archetypes, a way to access the hidden structures of the unconscious. When a person read their chart, they were not uncovering a mechanical fate, but opening a symbolic mirror into the soul. In this way, astrology and psychology began to intertwine. The horoscope became a form of self-analysis, a tool for reflection, a dialogue between conscious mind and hidden archetypes. Others sought justification in more physical realms. They looked to astronomy, to physics, to biology, searching for bridges. The moon's pull on the tides was undeniable. Could human beings, composed largely of water, also be subtly moved by lunar cycles? Farmers had long believed that planting by the phases of the moon brought better harvests. Women's menstrual cycles aligned closely with lunar rhythms. Could it be that life on Earth was more deeply attuned to celestial rhythms than science had yet discovered? Some speculated about electromagnetic fields. The sun, with its storms and flares, sent waves of radiation cascading toward Earth, disrupting radio signals, influencing weather, even stirring the northern lights into motion. Could planetary positions, through their gravitational or magnetic interplay, create subtle fields that touched the human nervous system? Others pointed to chronobiology, the science of biological rhythms. Human beings lived by circadian rhythms, guided by light and darkness, by the daily rising and setting of the sun. If we were so sensitive to cycles of day and night, might we also be sensitive to longer cycles, the months of the moon, the years of Jupiter, the decades of Saturn? Of course, hard evidence was elusive. Controlled experiments often found no measurable force, no repeatable effect. Yet astrology persisted, and its persistence itself became a puzzle. Why did so many intelligent people, in every culture, across every century, find truth in the stars? Psychologists offered another explanation: the power of suggestion. They pointed to what is now called the Barnum effect, the tendency of people to accept vague, general statements as highly personal. When told, you sometimes feel insecure but also long for recognition, nearly everyone feels described. Perhaps astrology worked not because the stars influenced us, but because humans are naturally skilled at finding meaning, at fitting stories to their own lives. And yet even skeptics admitted that something intriguing was happening. Astrology encouraged reflection. It gave people a framework for their lives. It inspired them to consider who they were, what they wanted, and where they were going. Even if planets had no force, the symbolic act of aligning oneself with them created a sense of order. It was, as some called it, a cosmic Rorschach test, where each person saw their own truth reflected in the stars. Still, for many, this explanation was not enough. They longed for something deeper. They felt in their bones that life was not random, that patterns existed, that the cosmos whispered to them in subtle ways. They pointed out that science itself once denied things now proven true, that invisible forces like magnetism and radiation were once dismissed as fantasy. Perhaps astrology too was waiting for a future science to uncover its hidden mechanism. Some turned to quantum physics with its mysteries of entanglement and non-locality. If particles could influence each other instantly across vast distances, could human lives also be mysteriously entangled with the positions of planets? Could the universe itself be woven of patterns of resonance, where stars and souls vibrated together like notes in a vast symphony? Though these ideas were speculative, they captured imaginations, offering a poetic bridge between the measurable and the mysterious. And so in the modern age, astrology lived in this twilight zone between faith and science, symbol and force, archetype and mechanism. For its critics, it was a superstition dressed in cosmic clothing. For its defenders, it was either an undiscovered science or a profound symbolic language that did not need the stamp of laboratories to hold meaning. Most, however, dwelt somewhere in between, using astrology not as a strict map of destiny, but as a mirror, a story, a way of making sense of the chaos of life. The scientific question of astrology may never be resolved to everyone's satisfaction, but perhaps the heart of astrology does not lie in proof at all. Perhaps it lies in the human hunger for pattern, for story, for belonging. Science tells us we are made of stardust forged in the hearts of ancient suns. Astrology takes that truth and gives it a voice, saying, "You are not only made of stars, you are connected to them. They live in you, and you live in them." And in that poetic claim, there is a kind of truth that no laboratory can disprove. In the end, whether through gravity or synchronicity, whether through psychology or physics, astrology continues to survive because it answers questions that science does not ask. Not how does the universe work, but what does the universe mean? Not what caused this, but what is the story of this? And as long as humans hunger for meaning, the stars will never be silent. They will always be read, not only through telescopes, but through charts, myths, and symbols. And those who gaze upward will always wonder, not only at what is, but at what it means. And so, under the same heavens that guided shepherds, kings, sailors, and lovers, modern humanity continues the ancient dialogue. The stars shine, indifferent yet inspiring, silent yet full of language. The scientists measure their light, the astrologers interpret their patterns, and between them lies the eternal human heart, searching, dreaming, telling itself the same story in countless forms, that we belong to something vast, mysterious, and beautiful, and that our lives, however small, are written among the stars. Though the sky is one and the stars shine over every land alike, humanity has never looked upward in exactly the same way. Each culture, shaped by its own history, language, and environment, read the heavens with its own accent, like voices singing different melodies to the same eternal song. What we call astrology is not a single tradition, but a family of traditions, each with its own symbols, calendars, myths, and methods of interpreting the celestial script. In the ancient lands of India, a system arose that would come to be known as Jyotish, the science of light. The sages who composed the Vedas, among the oldest scriptures known to humankind, saw the heavens not merely as physical bodies, but as gods in motion, eternal deities whose movements revealed the unfolding of karma. To them, a birth chart was not random chance, but a cosmic record of debts and gifts carried from previous lifetimes. A person was born at a specific moment because their soul had chosen it, because the alignment of planets at that time mirrored the lessons they were meant to learn. Vedic astrology differed from Western systems in that it was based on the sidereal zodiac, tied not to the symbolic signs of the equinoxes, but to the actual constellations in the sky. The 12 signs were the same in name, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, but they were measured by the stars themselves, not by seasonal markers. And beyond these, the Vedic seers also divided the sky into 27 lunar mansions called nakshatras, each with its own presiding deity, myth, and spiritual significance. To be born under Ashwini was to carry the fire of swift horsemen, healers of the gods. To be born under Rohini was to embody beauty, charm, and abundance. Every detail of the chart was woven into an intricate fabric of destiny. The astrologers of India also placed immense emphasis on the dashas, the planetary periods that unfold across a lifetime. It was not only where the planets stood at birth, but when their influence would ripen that mattered most. One person might pass through the fiery period of Mars in youth, filled with conflict and courage, while another might endure the heavy lessons of Saturn later in life, when patience and discipline were demanded. In this way, the chart was not a static picture, but a living rhythm, a dance of time revealing when fortunes would rise and when trials must be endured. Far to the east, in the heart of China, another great system blossomed, one that did not divide the heavens into 12 constellations, but into 12 animals, each turning with the wheel of years. Rat, ox, tiger, rabbit, dragon, snake, horse, goat, monkey, rooster, dog, pig, each carried a symbolic character, not only for individuals but for the very flavor of time itself. A child born in the year of the dragon was believed to embody power, ambition, and charisma, while one born in the year of the pig might be kind, generous, and blessed with simple joys. Yet Chinese astrology was not only about years, it wove together the cycles of the moon, the interplay of yin and yang, and the 5 elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, water, that were seen as the fundamental energies of the universe. A chart was not simply about birth, but about harmony, about finding balance between forces. Just as acupuncture aligned the body's energy meridians, so too did astrology align the life with cosmic rhythms. If one lived out of balance with the stars, misfortune could arise. If one aligned with them, harmony, health, and prosperity could flourish. The Chinese also used astrology not just for personal guidance, but for matters of state. Emperors relied on court astrologers to determine auspicious times for war, construction, or marriage alliances. To rule in defiance of heaven was unthinkable, for heaven's mandate was believed to be written in the stars. When dynasties rose and fell, the heavens were said to have foretold it through comets, eclipses, and the turning of cycles. Across the seas in Central America, the Maya gazed upward with a precision that still astonishes modern scholars. They created calendars of staggering accuracy, mapping solar years, lunar cycles, and even the long precessions of the equinoxes. To them, time itself was sacred, and astrology was not merely about individuals but about entire epochs. Every day carried its own energy, its own signature, woven from the combination of sacred numbers and day signs. A person's birth was marked by these signs, and their character was said to embody the essence of that day's spirit. One might be born under the sign of the jaguar, fierce and mystical, while another might be born under the sign of the reed, destined to uphold truth and order. The Maya saw themselves as participants in vast cosmic cycles, not just as individuals with private destinies, but as parts of great turning wheels of time, each cycle carrying the seeds of creation and destruction. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean world, Hellenistic astrology flowered from the fusion of Greek philosophy, Egyptian star wisdom, and Babylonian omen reading. This was the system that would give birth to much of what the Western world still knows as astrology today: the 12 houses, the aspects, the rising sign. The Greeks, with their love of mathematics and harmony, brought geometry to the stars. They saw planets not only as symbols but as actors in a grand cosmic drama, forming angles to each other that sang like chords of music. A square brought tension, a trine brought harmony, an opposition created challenge. Life itself was a symphony, and astrology was the notation of its score. From Hellenistic roots, astrology traveled into Rome, where emperors sought guidance from their charts, though often in secret, for the power of prediction was feared as much as it was desired. Later, it was carried into the Islamic Golden Age, where scholars preserved and expanded the Greek texts, translating them into Arabic, refining them with new observations, and spreading them into medieval Europe. The words we use even now, like ascendant, zenith, or almanac, echo with this heritage. Each culture layered its own spirit onto the stars. The Arabs emphasized the role of lots and parts, mathematical points in the chart that revealed hidden fates. The Jewish mystics, through Kabbalah, saw astrology as a reflection of divine letters and numbers, a code written into creation. Medieval Europe embraced astrology in medicine, believing that each sign ruled a part of the body: Aries the head, Taurus the throat, Gemini the arms, and so forth. Physicians cast charts to know when to bleed a patient, when to harvest herbs, when to attempt surgery, aligning earthly medicine with heavenly timing. Even within a single tradition, countless branches arose. There was natal astrology, concerned with birth charts and personal destiny. There was horary astrology, where a chart was cast for the exact moment a question was asked, and the heavens were believed to reveal the answer. There was electional astrology, where one sought the most auspicious moment to begin a journey, a marriage, a business. There was mundane astrology, tracking the fate of nations, kings, and wars, seeing entire histories mirrored in the skies. And as centuries passed, new forms emerged. In modern times, psychological astrology took root, influenced by Jung and depth psychology, treating the chart not as a decree of fate, but as a symbolic guide to inner growth. Evolutionary astrology too arose, blending Western charts with ideas of reincarnation, seeing each placement as evidence of the soul's past lessons and future direction. Astrology was reborn, not as a rigid system of prediction, but as a living dialogue with the soul. What unites all these traditions is not a single method or belief, but a single yearning, the yearning to connect the human story with the cosmic story. Whether through animals of the zodiac, through lunar mansions, through Mayan day signs, or through planetary aspects, each culture found in the sky a reflection of itself. The stars became mirrors, calendars, teachers, guardians, and storytellers. And though the languages differ, the essence is the same, that human life is not an accident, but part of a vast and meaningful design. Even today, in a world of satellites and space stations, people in every corner of the globe still consult their horoscopes, study their charts, and align themselves with ancient rhythms. They do so not because they must, but because there is comfort, wonder, and beauty in believing that our lives are woven into something larger, that the stars above and the hearts within are two verses of the same eternal song. The stars have always been there, unchanging in their slow dance across the night, but the way people turned to them changed with every era. In the age of kings and emperors, astrology was guarded knowledge, whispered in the courts of rulers, carried by priests, scribes, and scholars. But as the modern world unfolded, the wisdom of the heavens slipped from royal chambers and entered the lives of ordinary people. It became both public and intimate, no longer hidden in temples or libraries, but printed on the pages of newspapers, spoken on radios, and later glowing from computer screens and phones. The journey into modern times began with upheaval. The Renaissance and the Age of Reason brought both revival and resistance. As science advanced, astrology faced new challenges. The telescope revealed moons circling Jupiter, the orbits of planets became calculable, and eventually the heliocentric model displaced the ancient geocentric view. For many, astrology seemed to belong to a world of myth, while astronomy became the respected child of reason. Yet astrology did not vanish, it transformed. In Europe of the 17th and 18th centuries, astrologers faced increasing skepticism. Universities that had once taught astrology as part of medicine and natural philosophy began to exclude it, narrowing their focus to what could be measured, weighed, or tested. But while it lost its place in academic halls, astrology found refuge among the people. Almanacs continued to print planetary positions, offering advice for farming, travel, and even marriage. In villages and towns, astrologers still read charts, helping families decide when to plant crops, when to embark on journeys, or when to christen a child. Astrology survived not in ivory towers, but in kitchen tables, taverns, and marketplaces. The Industrial Revolution, with its machines and smokestacks, changed the rhythms of human life. Cities grew, and nights were lit with artificial light, making the stars less visible than ever before. Yet perhaps because the heavens grew harder to see, the longing for their guidance grew stronger. Amid the noise of factories and the rush of trains, people still sought meaning beyond the material. And so, astrology entered the world of print in a new way. In the 19th century, astrology merged with spiritual movements like theosophy and Western esotericism. Mystics such as Madame Blavatsky spoke of ancient wisdom hidden in the stars, connecting astrology with reincarnation, karma, and hidden cosmic laws. These teachings appealed to those disillusioned by strict materialism, who hungered for a bridge between science and spirit. Astrology, once dismissed as superstition, was reborn as a spiritual language, a way of explaining not only destiny, but the deeper evolution of the soul. Then came the 20th century, an era of newspapers, magazines, and mass media. It was here that astrology transformed into something at once simplified and universal. In the 1930s, a British astrologer named R.H. Naylor was asked to write a column about the newborn Princess Margaret. His predictions about her life drew enormous public interest, so much so that the newspaper requested more. From this spark, the modern horoscope column was born. Suddenly, astrology was no longer only for those who had their birth charts carefully calculated. Anyone could open a paper and read a message for their sign, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, each with a small piece of guidance for the day or week ahead. This innovation changed astrology forever. It simplified the art, reducing complex charts to 12 broad categories. Yet in doing so, it also gave astrology a voice that could reach millions. People began to identify strongly with their sun signs, saying, "I'm a Leo," or "She's a Virgo," as though the sun alone defined them. While professional astrologers sometimes lamented this simplification, it undeniably made astrology accessible. It gave ordinary people a taste of the stars in their daily lives, a spark of mystery and possibility in the midst of routine. The horoscope columns spread across the world. Newspapers in America, Europe, Asia, and beyond carried daily or weekly astrology readings. Radio shows picked them up, and later television hosts spoke of zodiac traits with charm and humor. Suddenly, astrology was not hidden wisdom, it was pop culture. It became a topic at parties, a way to flirt or to understand a friend, a playful yet intriguing language spoken casually across generations. But even as it became popularized, astrology also deepened in new ways. The 20th century gave birth to psychological astrology inspired by thinkers such as Carl Jung. Jung himself was fascinated by astrology, believing it reflected the archetypes of the collective unconscious. He spoke of synchronicity, the meaningful coincidences between inner life and outer events, and saw astrology as one way this mystery expressed itself. Under his influence, astrologers began to see charts less as rigid predictions and more as maps of personality, inner conflicts, and potential growth. The planets became symbols of psyche, Saturn representing discipline and shadow, Venus embodying love and values, Uranus bringing sudden change and innovation. Astrology became not just about fate, but about self-discovery. Meanwhile, the countercultural movements of the 1960s and 1970s embraced astrology with passion. In a time of rebellion against authority, war, and materialism, young people looked to the stars for guidance and meaning. Astrology appeared in psychedelic art, in music lyrics, in spiritual communes. The age of Aquarius, sung by the fifth dimension, became a symbol of hope for a new world of harmony and freedom. Astrological symbols merged with tarot, yoga, meditation, and other practices, weaving into a tapestry of alternative spirituality that continues to this day. The late 20th century also brought a new wave of astrology books, workshops, and professional associations. Astrologers blended ancient traditions with modern insights, exploring karmic astrology, relationship compatibility, financial astrology, and more. For every aspect of life, there seemed to be a planetary key. And then, like a sudden acceleration of fate, the digital age arrived. The internet transformed astrology into a global phenomenon once again, where once one had to seek out an astrologer or flip through an almanac, now anyone could enter their birth details into a website and receive a full chart instantly. Computer programs replaced hand-drawn charts, making the art more accessible than ever. Forums and communities sprang up where people shared interpretations, discussed transits, and compared experiences. Astrology was no longer hidden behind expertise, it was democratized, open to anyone curious enough to explore. Social media carried astrology into new realms of creativity. Memes about zodiac signs spread like wildfire, playful yet resonant, sparking laughter and recognition. Apps began offering daily horoscopes, tailored charts, and personalized reports, combining the ancient symbols with sleek modern design. Millennials and Gen Z embraced astrology not as dogma, but as a language of self-expression, a way to understand relationships, moods, and life's uncertainties. Astrology also adapted to the pace of modern life. Short, shareable content brought zodiac insights to millions who might never open a book or study a chart. A single sentence, Scorpios never forget, or a playful compatibility joke could spark conversations across cultures and continents. In a fragmented digital world, astrology offered a shared myth, a reminder that despite differences, everyone is under the same sky. Yet beneath the playfulness there remained depth. Many turned to astrology in times of uncertainty, when traditional institutions felt unstable, when politics, economy, and climate seemed overwhelming. In such times, astrology provided both comfort and perspective. It reminded people that cycles exist, that hard times pass, that every challenge has its season, and that endings often carry the seeds of new beginnings. Whether one believed literally in the influence of planets or not, the symbolic wisdom of astrology spoke to the heart. Critics continued to dismiss astrology, pointing to the lack of scientific proof, the vague generalities of horoscopes, the inconsistencies across traditions. But for believers and practitioners, astrology was never only about science in the modern sense. It was about meaning, about synchronicity, about weaving the personal story into the cosmic story. And in a world that often felt random and disconnected, the idea of living within a meaningful pattern was itself healing. By the early 21st century, astrology was everywhere. On Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, in apps with millions of users, in magazines and podcasts. Some sought it as entertainment, others as guidance, others as serious spiritual practice. But whatever the depth of belief, its presence was undeniable. The stars, once the private language of priests and kings, now whispered daily to anyone who cared to listen, carried not by parchment or ink, but by glowing screens in the palms of billions. Astrology had reinvented itself many times before, through Babylon and Greece, through India and China, through medieval courts and modern printing presses. And now, in the digital age, it wore yet another form, quick, accessible, global, playful, yet still carrying the ancient heartbeat of wonder. For in the end, its essence was the same as it had always been, the desire to belong to something greater, to see the self reflected in the cosmos, to believe that life is not a lonely accident but a meaningful thread in the vast tapestry of time. And so, astrology continues to walk with humanity, changing its face but never its soul, whispering quietly in every age. Look upward, for your story is written among the stars. The stars, though countless, are silent. They shine without words, without judgment, without preference. And yet for as long as humans have walked beneath them, we have heard their silence as music, translated their patterns into stories, and seen in their stillness a mirror of our restless hearts. Astrology, born in temples and courts, matured in libraries and almanacs, spread through printing presses and radio waves, has now arrived in an age of science and skepticism, of algorithms and satellites, where the heavens are no longer unreachable but mapped and measured with relentless precision. And still, in spite of all, people turn to them not merely to calculate, but to feel, to find meaning. The modern world is a paradox. On one hand, the universe is understood in ways our ancestors could never imagine. Astronomers track the death of stars billions of light years away, detect exoplanets circling other suns, and measure the faint radiation left from the birth of time itself. The cosmos is vaster, more complex, and more extraordinary than even the boldest myths once dared to describe. Yet, on the other hand, the individual human being feels smaller than ever, just one fragile mind floating through an endless void, a brief spark between birth and death. In such immensity, it is natural that people yearn for connection, for patterns that restore a sense of belonging. Astrology, whether or not one believes in its literal truth, answers this yearning. And so the debates rage. Scientists armed with data point to tests where horoscopes fail to predict outcomes better than chance, where personality traits do not align neatly with sun signs, where statistical studies find no measurable influence of Mars or Venus. They argue that astrology is illusion, a trick of psychology and suggestion, fueled by vague language and human bias. They point to the Barnum effect, the tendency for people to see themselves in general statements, as proof that horoscopes are merely cleverly worded mirrors, reflecting back what people wish to see. Yet believers answer differently. They say astrology is not a science in the modern sense, but a symbolic language, a way of interpreting life rather than predicting it mechanically. Just as music cannot be measured in equations alone, yet moves the soul, so too astrology works in the realm of meaning, not mechanism. They argue that life itself is not a laboratory experiment, but a lived experience of synchronicities, choices, archetypes, and cycles. If astrology resonates, it is because it speaks to something deeper than logic, the poetry of existence, the mystery of being. Between these two positions, countless individuals continue their own quiet conversations with the stars. Some treat astrology playfully, checking daily horoscopes out of curiosity, smiling when they fit, shrugging when they don't. Others dive deeper, studying charts with meticulous care, exploring how planetary positions seem to echo inner struggles, turning transits into guidance for growth and reflection. For some, astrology is entertainment. For others, it is therapy. For a few, it is sacred truth. The psychological dimension has perhaps been astrology's most enduring bridge into modern thought. Carl Jung, though cautious in his words, insisted that astrology worked because it reflected archetypes within the human psyche. He told of patients whose charts reveal patterns uncannily parallel to their inner conflicts. For Jung, astrology was not about planets physically influencing people, but about the mysterious unity of inner and outer events, a phenomenon he called synchronicity. In his vision, the birth chart was not a machine of fate, but a symbolic map of the soul's landscape. Many who follow astrology today adopt this view, using it less as fortune-telling and more as a tool for self-awareness. But beyond psychology, there is something older and harder to put into words. Humans do not live only by facts, they live by stories. And astrology, at its core, is an immense story, the story of the sky and the story of the self woven together. It tells us that we are not random specks, but participants in a cosmic drama. It places our struggles, loves, losses, and triumphs within a larger pattern, and in doing so, eases the sting of chaos. To believe that Saturn teaches lessons or that Venus blesses love is to believe that our pain has purpose, that our joy is echoed in the heavens, and even if no planet cares, the act of believing shapes how we carry our lives. Why then does astrology endure? Perhaps because it gives form to longing. In a world where technology connects us yet leaves many lonely, where science explains but rarely consoles, astrology offers both connection and consolation. It is intimate, personalized down to the moment of one's birth, and yet universal, shared across cultures and centuries. It allows someone in Tokyo, another in Cairo, another in New York, to all look up at the same sky and say, "We are under the same stars." In this way, astrology binds strangers into a silent fellowship. There is also a humbling truth within it, one often overlooked. If astrology teaches anything, it is patience and perspective. The movements of planets unfold over months, years, decades. They remind us that life itself has cycles, that winter does not last forever, that growth follows decay. In a world of instant gratification, astrology whispers of longer rhythms, of tides that cannot be rushed. For those who listen, it cultivates endurance, reminding them that today's hardship may be tomorrow's preparation. And perhaps the greatest irony is this: while science seeks certainty and proof, astrology thrives in ambiguity. Its symbols are fluid, open to interpretation, adaptable to each life's complexity. To some, this is its flaw, to others, its genius. For in ambiguity lies the freedom to discover, to project, to create meaning. Astrology does not command, it suggests. It does not bind, it invites. Its power lies not in dictating destiny, but in helping people see themselves from another angle, like a mirror reflecting hidden dimensions. The story of astrology is not finished, for it is as endless as the sky. Already, in the digital age, new forms are emerging: AI-generated charts, online readings, communities that blend astrology with psychology, art, and activism. Some wonder if astrology will fade, dismissed by future generations as a quaint relic. But others sense it will endure, precisely because it adapts, reshaping itself in every age without losing its essence. Whether as sacred practice or casual amusement, it continues to offer what humans crave most, a sense of meaning, a reminder that life is connected to something vast and mysterious. And so we return, as all stories do, to the stars themselves. Imagine a night free of city lights, where the Milky Way stretches like a river of fire across the heavens. Stand there as our ancestors once did, with no telescope, no screen, no theory, only the naked sky. The stars do not speak, yet they invite us to speak. They do not move for us, yet we move because of them. We give them names, trace them into figures, link them to myths of gods and heroes, and in doing so we give shape to our own journey. Astrology, whether true in the language of science or not, is true in another way, in the way it has carried human imagination, longing, and wisdom across millennia. For perhaps the real power of astrology has never been in predicting the future, but in helping us live the present with more wonder. When someone reads their chart and feels seen, when a horoscope lifts their spirit, when planetary cycles help them endure hardship with patience, then astrology has done its work. It has reminded them that their life is not small, that their struggles are part of a greater pattern, that even in the vast silence of the cosmos, there is meaning to be found. The stars shine still, indifferent, eternal. Yet in their light we find stories. In their patterns we find ourselves. And so long as human beings walk the earth, so long as they look upward and ask why, astrology will live, not in the heavens, but in the hearts that turn to them for guidance. The tale of astrology is the tale of humanity itself, always seeking, always wondering, always weaving the unknown into meaning. And just as the sky has no end, so too does this search continue night after night, generation after generation. For in the end, to look at the stars is to remember that we are not alone, that we belong to the universe, and that somewhere, hidden among the constellations, lies the reflection of our own mysterious soul.